Good evening, YouTuber subscribers and friends and alike. It's Grant coming at you from a Quality Inn in Rockford, Illinois tonight. A subscriber and a friend of mine and a fellow expediter from back in the day, Sam, I'll give you a shout out, asked me to go over the numbers that I've come up with in transporting, having done a bunch of trips this summer. See if there's anything different from when I did this beforehand. So excuse me for the chicken scratch here, but I'm going to try my best to kind of sum it up, some of the things I've learned, give or take. This is kind of a daily average, give or take. If you take a 2,000-mile run, it pays between 80 cents and $1.10 a mile, cents per mile. So it would pay roughly, just to make the math easier, $2,000. Now you get 1,000 up front and 1,000 on delivery, but the unit fuel cost is somewhere between $600 and $700, depending on what kind of unit you're taking. If you're taking a Class C or Class B or V, or like a incomplete cutaway chassis, they call it, that I deliver a lot to, or a step van, any one of them for a 2,000-mile run will take somewhere between $600 and $800, give or take in fuel. Sometimes they give you incentives on this. If it's a hot run, it has to get there. Sometimes they don't. If it's more of a colder or normal run that the factory just gave them, that they can deliver anytime because it's going to, like, say, an RV dealership to just keep their inventory up, then they won't give you really much of an incentive. But if somebody's bought the RV, or they're trying to get it to an RV show one time or something, sometimes they'll give you a $100 incentive on top of that, give or take, if you get it there and delivered by what time they're trying to give you to get it there. At delivery, you would receive the other $1,000, but that's minus roughly $100 worth of escrow, and you have to pay it into an escrow account, basically a security deposit on the unit. Each unit that you take until you get up to $1,500, and what that is basically it pays the deductible for transporting, and that way if you get in an accident or a wreck or somebody hits you or whatever, and the insurance automatically, especially with commercial insurance, is expensive and everything, they'll usually take that $1,500 or $1,000 of that $1,500 out as the deductible, and basically the driver ends up paying for that. But I would much rather pay $1,000 or $1,500 instead of $100K worth of a RV unit if I end up totaling it my fault or somebody else's fault or whatever. So in the end, it works out for us to our benefit to pay into that to do it. But they average between 30%. That's roughly around 30% of your load or something goes to that, which comes out to be like $100 out of a $2,000 dollar pay, I think, give or take. I'm trying this. So that being said, the numbers get a little bit skewed, but I'm gonna try my best to average this out. This is like an average load that you want to shoot for. You want to try to aim for around 2,000 miles each trip if you can do it. And then you want to try to find a way to come back. And that's why it helps to sign up for other transporting companies more than just the one, because that way you have different options when it comes to doing back. Because if you, let's say you work for Synergy's great to run for. They have the nice RVs that you can, technically speaking, live in. You can't put the house on, power on or anything, but you can drive it and you can sleep in it all the way there. But the problem with Synergy is it's on a one-way trip, pretty much, and then you have to find your way back across country. But Synergy has a lot of loads going out west, which would give you 1,500 to 2,000 to 2,200 miles every single time if you take the westbound roads. And sometimes if you go east, you can get that too. Well, you can get about 1,000 miles going east. But in my track of thinking, though, like say this week, for instance, I took a run for Synergy down to Texas. It was 1,400 miles south to Texas to Austin, or roughly Austin, Texas. And then to make everything cheaper and to make basically double the profit, I ended up taking a run back north, and that's what the run I'm on now. That's going to Norway, Michigan, which is like northern Wisconsin, and it's 1,600 miles back this way that's paid for again. The difference being there is I only had to go from Austin, Texas to Laredo, Texas to get this one, to pick it up, and then to go back north. And see, doing that made it so that only the bus cost and the lift cost about $100, give or take, altogether. Well, not even 100. I think it was 10 and 10, 30, 50, probably about $60, I think it was, between the bus cost and the lift cost to go from the RV dealership to the bus stop, or the downtown Greyhound depot in Austin, and then I took a Greyhound from Austin down to Laredo, and then I had to take a lift back out of where the Laredo Greyhound drops you off at. But it all in total was like $60 to get from one paid trip to the next. And if you can manage to do that, you can get ahead very fast, because that increases your profit tenfold. You know, a 1,600-mile run, give or take, they pay automatically. You can just easily do the math in your head. They would pay $800 up front, $800 on delivery. Then your fuel cost of a 1,600-mile run is going to be roughly $200 less than that, give or take, depending on the mileage. So you're going to be on a 1,600-mile run, you're going to be $500 or $600 worth in the fuel. So you get $200 or $300 profit, give or take, on that first half of the run, except for that is also calculated in, and they're very good at calculating it in to where it will pay for any tolls along the route, or some of these states that going out west have permits that you have to stop and pay the port of entry at that state, and they average anywhere between $20 and $62. One was like 110 once. But they've already calculated that into the pay, the forward advance for the pickup. When you pick that up and take it out, they've already calculated that in on top of the mileage and what the fuel should cost to get it there and all of that. So basically the first half of that trip is kind of paid for, or they make it that way, so it's paid for. So technically you could show up broke if you had to, and then still make a run, and it would pay for the trip to get to where you're going. And then on delivery you would get the other half of the profit. So in 1,600 miles you would get $800 on delivery. And so taking that 1,400-mile run down there, I got $700, give or take, as the delivery profit, except for I had escrow come out, so I had like $600. I'm hoping I'm not losing people on the numbers. But I basically made $600 to take an RV from Synergy in Indiana down to Austin, Texas, and I made a little off the pickup money, so probably about $700, I think, profit. Then I spent not counting this, I spent $100 to go to Laredo, 60 to $100 to go to Laredo, and then coming back north here, I'm gonna make another $800 because it was 1,600 miles worth that they're paid. So all in all, that was like close to about a $1,500 profit this week, just simply from taking one long run down to Texas, and then taking a short little bus to the next pickup, and then going back north again. If you're able to continue to do that and go back and forth, you can actually make a business, an actual profit on top of the business. If you're not able to do that, and you take a Synergy run that goes out west, let's say, and then you don't have another company, or the companies that you work for don't currently have anything running back this way, then your only choice is to pay about roughly $400 worth of a plane ticket ahead of if you paid it ahead of time, you can get maybe $250, $300 worth of a plane ticket. You can get a little bit of the cost off a little bit by paying it ahead of time. But I've learned that life comes along and happens. You know, the RV breaks down, whatever, if you pay for the airline ticket ahead of time. So a lot of times I don't do it. It's worth it to me to pay the extra $100 cost if I have to pay for the same day or next day airfare back. That way life can't come along and say, oops, screwed up your airplane ticket because the RV broke down and now you're stuck in Wyoming for 2 days while they fix it, or whatever, or you're stuck there and they just terminate the run there in Wyoming and you have a ticket out of Washington. You know, things like that can and do come up, and some airlines will let you push that ticket out and you can use it at a different time, but then you got to keep track of when you're supposed to use that, and etc. And I'm not a fan or a pro of rearranging airplane tickets, and I don't like being on the phone and arguing with people and all of this, so I don't really tend to buy that plane ticket fare ahead of time. Sometimes I've done the bus fare ahead of time, but even still, either one that you go with, it's a risk that you're taking, that you may or may not be able to use that ticket in the future if you buy it ahead. However, if you don't buy it ahead, you end up paying about half of your profit to the transportation costs between all the little costs that add up that you don't notice, which is like the lift from the RV dealership to the bus terminal if you're taking the bus, or the lift to the airport if you're going to the airport, and then of course your airline tickets, and then the food at these expensive, like say airport terminals and stuff like that. You need to take that into account. And at the end of the day, you need to keep track of your trips and see how much profit you make per trip, and if it was worth going to next time, because that is one thing about this business. These, especially the RV dealerships, year round, they all have the same kind of RV going to the same place. So you already know what this trip from Synergy in Goshen, Indiana to Boise, Idaho, what exactly it's all going to cost, because you've been there and done it before. If you take another run out there to the same place, to Dylan's RV, I think it is, in Boise, if you take that same run again, you're going to know exactly what it's going to cost to get back. You're going to know what it's cost on average to get back by airfare or by bus fare, or however you do it. You can make money in this business, but let's just say if you're trying to pay for a house and a car payment and all this other stuff at this stationary place that you have, on top of being out here working all the time, you're going to be running your ass off to make that happen, unless you're able to take a tow car with you, or a motorcycle or something, or you're able to somehow or another cut your transportation cost back up a little bit. If you're not able to do that, you're not going to be able to get ahead in terms of being able to pay for such things like a bigger house payment or car payments and stuff like that every month. I mean, you can. If you really ran your ass off, you could. I'm signed up with 5 companies, and technically, illegally, if nothing else, I could run for each company and max their hours and mileage out each week and just run my ass off, and then yeah, I would be a hit on the money. But at the same time, I've learned when I turned 30 that not everything in life is about money. Back in my 20s, I would just be gung-ho for money. I'd burn the candle at both ends and in the middle and everything, and I'd just be working 96-hour weeks and just bang, bang, bang after that money like a money slave. Nowadays, in my 30s, I've realized, as I slowed down, that money ain't everything, that you're missing out on life if you just do nothing but chase the money. But anyway, in terms of a money-making business, if you can keep the transportation cost back down, especially if you sign up for other companies, like recently I've signed up for Norton Transport, which is home based out of Georgia. I think it's like Griffin, Georgia or something. And they have other terminals. But the reason I did that is because, for one, let's say if I take that Synergy run out to Boise, I happened to notice the other day on the load board for Norton that Norton actually happened to have a load that comes out of Boise and goes to California. Now, that's not the greatest. It don't come back east, where I'd want to go to Indiana to keep going. But it does take you to California, and California does have Pinnacle runs, Pinnacle being the other company that I take. Pinnacle has runs that go up and down California and the West Coast. And so you see how I can just jump from one to the next. I can go from Synergy's RV to Boise, and then take Norton's Boise to Southern California, and then take Pinnacle's Southern California, possibly all the way back up to Seattle, Washington. And then I can get a relatively cheap Seattle, Washington airfare, even same day, because it's a bigger airport, and fly back to Chicago, because they're both big airports. And then I cut my overall expenses down while increasing my profit 3 times fold, because all 3 of those trips have been profit, because they've been jumping from one trip to the next to the next. And if you can do that, you get ahead really fast. If you did that run, Synergy would be $2,000 to go out there, 2,000 miles, and end of the day, profit on that would probably be about $800, give or take, if you're not having to spend it on any real transportation or anything at the end of it, give or take. But if that's counting in your food and tolls and permits and stuff already, so yeah, at the end of the day, they'd pay out to probably be about $800, give or take, after escrow and all that. So you'd have $800 in your profit in your pocket in Boise, Idaho, and then you go across Boise, which probably wouldn't take but $30. And then you get in another truck for Norton, and you would take I forget, it's like 700-mile run to California. Norton has smaller runs, but they tend to pay better than the mileage. They pay like $1.20 almost, depending. And so, basically doing the math in my head on that one would be $350 or $400 profit, give or take, you'd get. And just get down there after the fuel and all that. So now, $800 from Synergy profit, $400 to get Norton run down to Southern California. So now you're $1,200 ahead. That's after the trips, both trips have paid for themselves and food and everything as you're going. And I'm not talking dining in restaurants every night, but I am talking like the fast food, to still be able to eat fast food a time or two a day, and get drinks and stuff like that on the road and whatever, and have that not actually count against your profit at the end. So it's actually paying you to do these trips. So anyway, Synergy would be $800 to Boise in profit. Norton would be about $400 to California in profit, so you'd have $1,200. Then if you're able to take a Pinnacle run that's nice and long, this is saying everything works out, but if you're able to take it to Seattle, that'd be another $700 or $800. I think it's 1,000. I can't remember. Somewhere between like 800 and 1,000 miles. I'm not sure, but with Pinnacle paying $1 a mile and the fuel cost and everything, you'd make probably another $500 worth of profit, give or take, off of running that Pinnacle step van probably up to Seattle. And then by the time you get to Seattle, you'd have 500 and 400 and 1,200, or I mean 800. So you'd have 900, 800. You'd have 1,700, give or take, in profit by the time you're getting on that plane, where you're paying for the plane. And you do have to pay, probably about $300, give or take, to Seattle at the airport to get to Chicago, and then from Chicago over to back to Indiana to Elkhart would be another $40. So give or take, you would get all the way back to Elkhart where you started, or Goshen where you started, with about $1,200 to $1,300 profit after 2 weeks worth of work having been paid for that 2 weeks. That's including an occasional hotel. That's including food, all your tolls, all your fuel, all your permits, all that paid for. And it's possible to make money if you're able to circle around like that. If you're not able to circle around like that, or if you choose not to, if you take a Synergy road load that goes out to middle of nowhere, let's say, I don't know, Vancouver, British Columbia, say it's a pretty good one, goes up there for like 2,500 miles or something like that, but then it costs you $600 to get back, then you start to lose out on transportation costs to be able to get back to the next trip faster by flying back. But the downsides and upsides to that is if you take a flight back, that's 2 days that you avoid having to take on the bus. The bus might be way cheaper, but then you're having to spend 2 days on the bus, which that's 2 days that you're not working, and instead you're probably eating $30 a day, give or take, in food those 2 days that you're getting across. So instead of working, you're actually costing yourself $60 to get across country again on the bus. Not to mention the bus all the way across country is a long trip. I've done it. It's not fun. However, if you fly back, you can actually work again those 2 days, because you can fly back in 5 hours, give or take, 3 to 5 hours, depending on where you fly back from. But that flight back will cost $300 or $400. So it's time versus money when it comes to that. Now, you might blow $300 or $400 getting back on the airplane, but you'd be back that same day, roughly. And then usually it's cheaper to fly into Chicago or Indianapolis or Fort Wayne than it is to fly into South Bend, but South Bend is the closest. I've tried them all out, and they kind of average out anyway, because if you fly into South Bend, you're paying slightly more than you would if you flew into Chicago, but at the same time, you have to take into account of the train or bus fare to get from Chicago back to Elkhart versus the city bus that you could take from the South Bend airport into Elkhart. It's $2 versus $50 or whatever, but that South Bend airport airplane cost is usually $100 more than Chicago, so I don't know if I'm making any sense or not, but it's all about your transportation cost. If you can keep your public transportation costs back at a minimum, you can do a whole lot better. If you're okay with going into debt, or if you have $6,000 to spend, I would highly recommend just buying a decent mid or small micro kind of car, like a Honda CRV that is good enough to tow behind these rigs, that doesn't put extra strain on the engine of these tow rigs and stuff like that if you're doing driveway. And then you buy the tow bar, and there's a shop right there in Goshen or Elkhart somewhere, I forget, because I haven't done it yet, but they charge like $1,500, give or take, to put the tow kit on. So you buy a $6,000 car that's decently dependable, and you buy $1,500 worth of tow kit to put onto it, and you're about $7,500 in, and you have a working tow car that you can tow behind the RV, and then it only costs you the gas to come back. The problem, my only issue with doing that, besides the maintenance of the tow car, is then I have to drive it all the way back, or I have to drive it the 200 miles to some other place to get another RV to hook it onto and go again. You know, that's what you'd prefer to do, is just have to drive the tow car 200 miles from one trip to the next to pick up another RV or box truck or whatever and go again. That would be the preference, but if nothing else, you had to have to drive all the way back across country. And either way, that puts me in this continuous cycle of drive. You know, I'm driving the RV, I'm driving the tow truck, the tow car, I'm driving the RV again, I'm driving the box truck. And I'm not trying to make it sound bad or nothing, but there are probably about 2 days a week that I prefer not to drive. You know, because it's a, you know, in a way, it's a job like anything else. I love driving, don't get me wrong, but I just don't want to do it every single day. So routinely, I take a night off or a day off or whatever in the hotel room every now and then, and just give myself a day to relax, to get caught up on my laundry, to just not have to drive. But at the same time, I've found for me personally, if I drive about 350 miles a day, I'm totally fine with doing that every day. And that's okay, but doing 580 miles a day, it's too much, because even though it's not doing much physically to your body other than you get fat from eating food and not doing anything other than that, it's taxing on your mind a little bit, because your mind is constantly, if you're paying attention to your driving like you're supposed to be, some people don't, but if you're constantly paying attention to your driving like you're supposed to be, 10 hours a day of that kind of gets old real quick. It's, mentally in your head, you're constantly scanning ahead to the roadways and stuff like that, like you're supposed to be doing. You're checking your mirrors and everything, and you're looking out for everybody else on the road, because that's the main deal of driving. That ain't even half the skill of driving. Isn't even your actual driving. It's the getting the hell out of everybody else's way, pretty much. Because there are some, let's just say, retards out there. I've had a few just today that tried to cut me off. Especially if you're driving a bigger vehicle, they see that bigger vehicle, and then I don't know if they've never driven a truck or an RV in their life, but they just come right up in front of you and then slam on the brakes. And sometimes it's just irritating that they do that, but a lot of it's because they've never driven it themselves. They don't know what it takes, especially a fully loaded semi. They don't know what it takes to stop in time, or they don't care. I don't know, but because of that, us drivers who have to drive the bigger vehicles have to constantly basically back off of other people and keep enough distance in front of us that even if they do that, you have an escape route. You can go this way and that way because you don't have cars in every single lane ahead of you when this is happening. So I would say on average I could probably every day drive 300 miles, because 300 miles takes you roughly 6 hours with the break. I learned from expediting the easiest way to keep the timing difference of how long it's going to take you with anything is, if it's 300 miles, just times it by 2. So 300 miles is going to take you roughly 6 hours with the drive time and the break time added in there. So if your drive time is 600 miles, it's going to take you roughly 12 hours. All you got to do is times whatever by 2. And it's the simplest way to do it, and it's pretty dang close each time. You can make that a little less by going faster than the speed limit. You can make that a little less by not taking as much of a break, but you still have to do fuel breaks no matter what. You're going to have to fill your vehicle up. Especially these campers, they take 100 to 150 a shot, depending on the size of their fuel tank, and they take maybe 10 minutes, give or take, to fill up, give or take, depending. The trucks not so much, because the trucks go to the diesel fuel island, and they have a much bigger nozzle, and so they fill up a lot faster. But the RVs tend to take a little while. The things I've learned, though, is mostly in terms of the ELD logs, you have to have at least one physical receipt of where you've been during your drive that day, so that if you're ever pulled over by DOT, they can say, hey, show me whatever the receipt that you have for the day, saying you were here at this such and such a place and time. That way they can compare that to your actual log that you're trying to do. That way they can make sure that you're not trying to fake your logs. And so just in general, and also keeping it for tax reasons, I keep all my receipts. I keep the food, I keep the fuel, I keep the lodging, and I keep anything extra that I buy for business purposes, or just anything extra that doesn't fit in any of those categories. in kind of a miscellaneous category, and that's how I divide it up. I divide it up by fuel, food, lodging, and miscellaneous. And then what I also do, I don't have an example of it because it's in the truck right now, but what I also do is every single trip, after I scan the paperwork in to get paid, you have to send them the copy of the bill of lading that's signed by the guy that you deliver it to and whatever. It's that they know what all happened with the trip. You have to scan that in order to get paid. And so every receipt that I have during that trip, I sort into those 4 categories of fuel, food, lodging, and miscellaneous, and I staple them to themselves together like that in those 4 categories, and then I take and staple them to the end of the paper of my BLL, because the BLL is going to say the date that you picked it up, and on some of those paperwork, I think Pinnacle has it to where the estimated 2 or 3 days or something that's going to take you to drive it. But it would be like a paper like this that has your date and time that you started at least. And then I post all the receipts on the back, or staple all the receipts on the back. It's separated in those four categories, and I take the time to do that now per trip, one by one, because when I go to file taxes, it's going to make life a little easier saying that during this week and this time, I have this amount of receipts. Because if you just throw them all in a bag, and then at the end of the month or something, keep it by per month or whatever, it's just going to be horrendously hard to get with a CPA, and that CPA is going to turn around and charge you an extra $100 and whatever of his or her time to go through sorting your stuff if you don't try and do it ahead of time. Now there's a way to do electronic stuff, like you can run QuickBooks, and I thought about doing that at first, but then my 2 downsides to doing that is it costs $10 a month, I think, for QuickBooks, which is not a big deal, but then also if you decide to lapse that in that $10 a month worth of running your QuickBooks, according to the reviews and comments of it, QuickBooks just forgets half your crap that you had stored on it if you lapse that $10. So to me, it's not worth taking all the time and effort for QuickBooks to turn around and screw you over right before the CPA looks at it, you know. But the other downside to keeping actual paper receipts is now I have to make sure that they're waterproof pretty much all year long. And then especially the receipts that were at the beginning of the year, I have to really keep tight and waterproof and everything moisture proof, because ink will eventually run off these receipts. And that's questionable on whether or not I should have been electronically scanning all the receipts too on top of it, which is extra added work on my part, but it might not have hurt to have electronic copies. But anyway, in terms of the taxes, at the end of the year, I'm hoping that I'll have, because there's 52 weeks in a year, so I'll have, well, tax time won't be quite that much, but I would guess 40, maybe about 40 weeks worth of trips. And then I only went 1 or 2 trips a week, give or take, so I might have a total of 70 or 80 trips, give or take. But each trip, within that time frame, I make sure to staple those 4 categories of receipts, and then in the trip with those receipts. And that way, at the end of the year, when I go to file taxes, life is going to be a lot easier, because I can say this week time, this to this, I was doing this. And they just go by the bigger paperwork that says, I took this trip on October 17th, I took this trip on October 24th, and it's basically a timeline. And then that will help me, because the CPA also has to figure out for taxes where you at in every state, in terms of for food and for fuel and all that, in order to write that off and whatnot. Each state is different in how they do their taxes and so on, and especially when you do the fuel. So it's just way easier to keep track of that ahead of time. But I was getting off on a tangent. That is what I've learned in terms of the tax point of it. I will mention one more thing about the smaller runs, and if you're not taking the tow car behind you, it's almost pointless to do a smaller run. I'll go over 300. It's on the other side of this page. Roughly small runs are 300 miles. A lot of these companies are going to try and stick you with a short run to be able to get a long run. Basically, they want to stick you with 300 miles in order to get 1,500 miles. And depending on where they drop it off, it might work, it might not. But this is another reason to be signed up with multiple companies, because you can say, you know what? Synergy, let's say, for instance, is trying to do a short run with long run. I can tell them, see you next week then. Pinnacle's offering me, a long run right out the gate. So if you can't compare, see you next week. And I don't want to be rough about it, but I'm just saying there's other options for me. I'm not going to get wrapped into that short run for long run. Now, don't get me wrong, I do it for them every now and then, depending on where they drop off at, but I'm not going to take a short run that's 300 miles that goes out to, I don't know, let's say like Kalamazoo, Michigan, or no, Kokomo, or whatever the hell. I can't think of the name. Let's say Red Key, Indiana. Say it's 300 miles. That might be about average. Red Key, Indiana, from Elkhart to Red Key might be about maybe 300 miles, 200 something. But anyway, Red Key, Indiana is kind of out there in the middle of nowhere, halfway between Indianapolis and Fort Wayne, I think, if I remember right. I'm not quite sure because I don't have a map in front of me, but I believe. And if I take something like that, then it'll end up costing me so much in taxi, or they won't have Lyft out in the middle of nowhere, so I'll have to take a taxi, or I'll have to hitchhike back out. And you do not want to get stuck in a situation like that on a short run. On a long run, that's mildly okay because you can at least make up the difference in your miles that you're getting paid at the transportation cost. But on a short run, it's not worth it because every penny that you spend on that short run is going to make it so that by the end of the day, if you're lucky, you'll have $100 profit on a 300-mile run. If you're extremely lucky. If you get dropped off in a big city, let's say you go Elkhart right to Indianapolis, and you're able to take a $50 bus ticket back from Indianapolis up to Elkhart, which I think that's what it was, I can't remember, you might make a $100 profit, give or take, after they've taken expenses out and you've taken the fuel out and all that. You can get ahead sometimes, but mostly it's not worth taking the short runs unless they pair it together with something that's really good, like 2,500 miles, or especially pay attention to where that short run drops off at. Like I say, if it drops off in Red Key, Indiana, you're gonna look forward to a $50 taxi lift back out of there. That's just to the bus stop, and then the bus stop is gonna be $50 to $100 more to get to wherever you're going next. And by the time they take escrow out, you end up getting paid, maybe if you're lucky, $80 to $100 for all day long worth of 300 miles. It's 6 hours worth of driving for $100, that's still okay. But I mean, you're out here to make money. You're not out here to volunteer your time. A 600-mile run, or a 300-mile run, 6 hours. You should bare minimum probably get $200 profit out of it, or it ain't worth doing. And that's exactly why they paired these short runs with the long runs, because people aren't going to take them otherwise, and so they try to force us into taking a short run for a long run. And I do it on occasion, but about half the time I say no, I have other companies, and that's the beauty of being signed on with 5 companies, because I can say, yeah, if you ain't going to have it, I'm going to do somebody else and go with them. If Synergy doesn't want to do it, Pinnacle's right in town too. Just go over them and run the step in. Doesn't totally matter to me on my point, because I still get paid and I still get the long miles. For my benefit, it benefits me to take Pinnacle, because Pinnacle sent me 2,000 miles out the other direction, versus Synergy would have done the same thing, 2,000 miles, but they wanted 300-mile load in front. That would cost me more time and money than it's worth. So you've got to, just like with expediting, you've got to be able to put your foot down in this business and say nah. And you got to have the leverage of being signed on with more than one company. I would not go out there and work for just Synergy by itself. I mean, possible that you can maybe get ahead with them if you have a tow car, but I would not recommend it. I would recommend being signed on with at least 3, because it's supposed to run 1 trip each company a month to stay valid. And I've just been calling ahead and checking on my status and staying valid that way, which they let you do as long as you check in with them. But you're supposed to be taking at least 1 trip a month to stay valid on their insurance. And so I would say probably try not to go above 4 companies. 3 is a good average. I personally have 5 right now, but that's only because I think I'm going to drop Classic, because Classic had a bunch of short runs. And short runs could be okay for their 600 or 700 miles runs, but they also only paid 70 or 80 cents a mile. And a lot of their runs were out there in the middle of nowhere. And then on top of that, Classic only had an Indiana terminal, and that's it. And I found out through experience, you want to sign up with companies that have multiple terminals. Synergy, I'm okay with only having an Indiana terminal with 6 or 7 different lots right here in Indiana, because they have long trips and they have nice cushy RVs to drive. So I want to keep them for that reason, because they notoriously will give you long westbound trips If Classic did that, then I'd stay with Classic. But Classic, at least the 4 or 5 times I've called them, and that's the other thing, is they don't have a load board to look on the list. You have to call in and ask, which I don't like doing because the dispatcher is free to give you whatever they want because it's their word of mouth. It's not on an actual list that shows what the loads are. You know, that's not being upfront with the drivers as far as I'm concerned. Don't get me wrong, I like Classic's atmosphere and everything, and I would like working for them if they didn't have so many dings against them. But the whole not having a load board is a big thing. If they would roll out a load board on a website or on a smart app, or even if they sent you messages, you know, even Pinnacle works off of Keep Trucking, which is our logging app, which ain't the greatest, but at least it shows a list of stuff for their different terminals. But the company should have different terminals around the country if you can sign up for one that does. Norton is based out of Georgia, but it has terminals, not really terminals so much as generic runs out of the middle of nowhere, like Boise, Idaho, which as you do this business, you'll find out that Idaho don't have very many runs coming out of it, for one thing. But Norton signs on with other load boards, so to speak, and then posts it on theirs. That's how they kind of work outside of their main terminal in Georgia. And so they have generically, I mean, they have a lot of short runs, but they have generic short runs all over the place, and I kind of like that idea because now I can take a long run out to Boise, Idaho or someplace and then take a short run for them. And they would, technically speaking, save my ass for 200 or 300 miles or whatever to get me to a better place to fly back from or to take another run or what. Pinnacle has a bunch of terminals. They have Tennessee, Indiana. They work out of Texas, but they don't have a terminal there. They have California, and they have Virginia. And they paid pretty much $1 or $1.10 a mile, which I like and I like. But they don't have RVs, and they only mostly have these metal step vans that are FedEx vans or UPS vans. They're okay to take every now and then, but because of that, I'm not going to only work for Pinnacle because that would just be slave labor working for them every single day in those hot vans. I don't mind taking them every now and then because they pay good enough to do it, and they go to, again, to locations that, like, say, Synergy wouldn't go to, because Synergy is just the one terminal in Indiana, and they spread out from there. They shoot out from there, and then you have to come back. Pinnacle might actually take you back to Indiana on occasion, so they're worth having for that reason. And then Quality has also been another good one. They have a main terminal in Indiana that ain't the greatest to work out of because at least people on foot have to walk 1.5 miles to get from the office with your packet, which is stupid, down to where the yard is, where you get your unit out of. That's kind of stupid for Indiana, but I have learned that in California and Texas and everything, they come in handy in those terminals because they have terminal runs from, like, Texas to Wisconsin, which gets me back north, not directly to where Indiana, where I wanted to go, but it gets me a hell of a lot closer because Wisconsin is way closer to Indiana than Texas. And so they make up the mile difference by doing that. So they're worth having because they have those terminals, again, out in the middle of nowhere. And they also Quality also tends to have pretty long runs too, 1,600 miles routinely, and 2,000 miles every now and then. And of course they got the short ones too, but at least they're not totally cut off like Classic. I'm not trying to badmouth Classic at all. It's just, without being able to see a load board, you have to go by the dispatcher's word of mouth. And then every time I've called in, which has been like 10 or 15 times now, they've all had 600, 700 mile runs, and that's it. At least that's all they offered me, but I don't know what they're looking at because I can't see the load board. Maybe they only offered me 600 mile run when they have somebody else 1,000, 1,200, 2,000 miles out. That's probably a regular that's been there 10 years. And in my opinion, I don't want to play with a favoritism type of company like that. That's my opinion on it. It's not very good or bad. I mean, if you're local, if you just want a daily job, run 300 miles and that's it, and you're local to Elkhart, Indiana, Classic would be perfect to work for you. If you just want to go down to Indianapolis and back, Classic's got that all day long. If that's all you want to do. I personally, summertime, maybe wouldn't mind it too much, depending on how much it costs to get back and everything, and I don't know, the cost of the short run ain't kind of worth it. But if you're local and you're just, especially if you're retired already and you're just doing it for something to do or an extra income or whatever, Classic would be a good one to run for because they have short runs that come right out of Indiana and you're back within a day or two. Doesn't work out for somebody like me that wants to go all the way across country on purpose to see the country and also to get paid those miles to go 2,000 miles out before I have to come back and get something. I'd much rather have the week-long thing than a day or two, and then still have the same cost, roughly the same cost of transportation either way, whether I had the miles to pay for it or not. The other thing I wanted to add on this video is recently I've been looking into a motorcycle that's slightly bigger than a dirt bike, but not a full heavy motorcycle like a Harley. I would love to have a Harley, but the lift, the tow lift kind of thing, there's like a lift hitch thing that goes onto the back hitch receiver of an RV anyway, that I saw on Amazon and a few other places that I looked up the other day that a friend of mine showed me. Actually, I think it was a Craigslist rideshare told me about on the way back from on a rideshare from Craigslist. And occasionally you want to take up that too, by the way. So you get on Craigslist and see if you can get a ride back, if you can stand to put up with whoever, because you can split the cost of gas and stuff like that, and you can find a cheaper route to the bus or the plane back. But anyway, off that side note, I think he's the one who showed me this motorcycle that you can tow on a tow hitch and said that's the way to go. And that is quite the light bulb in my head went off when he said that, because especially on these shorter runs, if you take a 300-mile run and you have a bike that you're towing behind you, it's, you know, $20 worth maybe of gas to put in that bike and go that 300 miles back, or that 100 miles to wherever you gotta go, and hook the hitch back up and go again. You know, if it's an easy enough hitch to take down and put up, but that's why you have to have a lighter bike, because you have to kind of jack it up, so to speak, because you bring the front wheel of the bike up onto the lift and strap it in there somewhere or another, and then the rear wheel stays on the ground and follows the RV, supposedly. My only real issue with that is I also work for other companies, like say this run back from Texas. If I'd had a bike on that one, I would have to jury rig the bike to fit on the back of this incomplete chassis that I've showed you on Facebook and I've showed you on these videos before, where that's just the truck with the metal frame behind it. And that'd be okay if I could figure out how to get the bike up on the metal frame itself and be able to strap it down on it. But me just by myself, unless they have a forklift there, you know, especially one of these heavier bikes, that would not be fun to try to get it up on there. And then even then, I don't know if the customer that I show up to, especially if I'm delivering to a private customer, that they're going to appreciate me showing up with a bike on the truck itself when it's, you know, obviously brand new and they're buying whatever $100,000 outfit, blah blah blah. So that's the issue that I have with the bike. Now there is also a way to tow cars behind that. You know, like I was saying, you could buy a $6,000 car and then that $1,500 tow kit, and then there's a modified tow kit that you can put on the back of these metal frames for these cutaways too. But at the time you by the time you invest and buy into all that, I'm not all too sure it's worth it, if it pays it off in the long run to do it. So for now, anyway, I'm going to continue with the public transportation because it's just easier, so long as you, like I say, line up a long trip, and then hopefully when you end that trip, you can start another trip at like 100 or a couple 100 miles or less away from the first trip. That way it don't cost you that much in transportation to get to the next one. I heard a rumor of a guy that goes from Indiana to, I think it was Virginia, with, I think it's step van, so, which I'm not a big fan of doing, but he goes there from a step van, I think it's Pinnacle, I'm not sure, but then walks across the street from a FedEx van lot, gets into a UPS factory lot, takes a UPS van back to, I think it was Tennessee, goes from Tennessee back to Indiana, and he basically makes this triangle, and that's all he does. And he's worked there so long that that's all he has to do on a dedicated route. Now, if I spent my time and money and effort sweet talking dispatchers and stuff like that, you can maybe get on a route like that, but that's also going east, and I've been a big fan of going west, the westbound runs with the longer mileage. And I crisscrossed this country all over the place with when I was expediting on the east side, east of the Mississippi, so I haven't really been taking eastbound runs. But because of the winter time, I'm going to start at least doing the deep south runs, going down to Florida, and then basically trying to go between Texas, California, Georgia, and Florida, and staying south of the snow belt for this winter. And so I'm at least going to be over east doing that. But next summer I might go in the northeast, potentially do more Virginia and New Hampshire and all that, and Maine, and stuff that I missed out on this summer because I was too busy going west. And since I spent all the time going out west, you know, I've done those routes 3 or 4 times now. I kind of, would like a change next summer anyway. But I'm also looking to go to Canada and Alaska sometime. If you're stuck with me this far, I hope I made some kind of sense on the numbers and kind of what I've figured out running this game. You have to figure it out for yourself as you come out here. You have to plan ahead. You have to know that transportation costs, that hotel costs are going to be in it here and there. I mean, there's going to be times when you show up in the middle of nowhere and your only option is to get a hotel for the night because public transportation, let's say the city bus downtown to get to the Greyhound or the taxi, are not answering the phone or whatever, and you're stuck paying for a hotel unless you want to camp out on the street. I mean, you have to realize that that could very well happen to you on the road, which I've already known for years before this job happened. So I just kind of modified this job into my already into my lifestyle. So not a big deal to me. But if you're going right from a 9 to 5 home type of commuting job and then you want to jump into this, that's fine. But I would say to have some money up front or to have some prior street time experience, because you don't want to get out in the middle of nowhere and have your only choice be a hotel room and then you not have the money to pay for it. Would be my opinion, And just as I'm saying that, I'm going to be dropping this truck off in Wisconsin, well, northern Wisconsin, which is basically Norway. Michigan is where I'm going, but it's northern Wisconsin pretty much, right over the Michigan border, on the upper peninsula of Michigan or whatever. Could be pretty cold here in a day or two, I'm not sure, but so far in Rockford, Illinois, it's like 70 degrees outside is the low right now, so I'm thinking I'm going to have it made within a day or two of getting it up there now. But you always want to keep that in mind in terms of the weather and what you're packing with you for it. And if you're coming out of that 9 to 5 job, like I say, it's a change. I mean, it's definitely an adventure. It feels like you're retired all the time. I love this job. I wish I'd have found this job when I was 23, because I would have done it off and on all the way up to now. I know for a fact I would have done it off and on as long as I had kept my driver record going good and kept everything legal with my driver's license. And of course you can pass the DOT physical as long as you can do those, and you can pass the drug test. As long as you can do that and not have any problems with taking a random drug test every now and then and stuff. Those 3 things, you can keep your driving record pretty clean with no accidents and no real getting pulled over for this or that. They don't care on occasion if you do something once every 3 years or something comes up. Life happens. They look the other way on the little things like a speeding ticket. But if you can keep your record pretty clean and not have any reckless driving and all this other crap and hitting accidents where you're hitting people and whatever, if you can keep that clean, if you can keep your driver's license active by not having fines that you didn't pay and all that, if you can keep your driver's license active, and then you can pass a DOT physical every 2 years, and then if you can pass a random drug test and an annual drug test, I think it is, and a random drug test when they call you and give you 2 hours to respond to wherever and go and take a drug test, and they pay for it all. You just have to go there and do it. If you can do those 4 things, then this job feels like retirement. Doesn't even hardly feel like a job, because it's your life, your time on the road. You can decide how long or how short it's going to take you, and they're okay with you taking a day or 2 extra. Routinely I do 300 miles a day, which ends up making my runs 2 or 3 days extra more than somebody else's run would have been. However, that somebody else running 600 miles a day instead of 300 miles a day might very well get in an accident because they've fallen asleep at the wheel, or wildlife happens or whatever. Or especially in the winter time and they're driving like ape shit down the road. Excuse my French. But you have these people that don't know how to drive that shouldn't be driving. If they're doing that type of thing and they're chasing the money and running after that, and that's the only thing they're thinking of, they could cause an accident versus my 300 miles a day. Not saying I'm perfect at driving or anything, but I take my time and I watch what I'm doing for that reason. And then on top of it, I don't push myself to those limits for nothing. I try to average 300 miles a day, give or take, and that's what my comfort zone is, because that way driving feels more like a hobby than a job. You start to go above 300 miles, it starts to feel more like work because you're taking a longer time to get there. 300 miles, I have all day long to get 300 miles, and a 300 mile trip takes roughly 6 hours, and I have 10, 12 hours of the day to do it. You can see how you can easily take an hour break here, an hour break there, and break it all up to where you're driving an hour, break an hour, drive a couple hours, and then it just feels like retirement instead of continuously driving. You can chase after the money all you want, and lots of people can make a hell of a lot better living on this than I'm doing. But I'm not chasing the money. I'm doing it out here to live. And that's the key thing. You have to figure out where you're at, if you're a slave to money or if you're actually enjoying your life. But this video is getting pretty long. I don't know how long it's going to take me to upload it. And hopefully it'll upload overnight when I do it on Wi-Fi. And we'll see how it goes. But I thought I would make a nice long video and try to explain everything I've learned this summer, which is basically the same, well, a little bit more of the same of how to get here and there. Which is, that's based on experience on the routes. I could go on and on forever about how you should take this route to that way you can go to this route and that route. It's the same thing as expediting, to where once you get experienced in it, you know where kind of the lanes for where these RVs go to and where the step vans go to and where the box trucks go up from. And by experience, you learn where these terminals are at and where these factories are at. And you learn, if I go here, there's a good chance that I'll be able to get something out of this. And I can go back, like in Laredo, Texas. If I go anywhere near Laredo, Texas, I can do what I did this week and I can take something out of Laredo. You know, that all comes from experience, and I can't give away all like the secret cheat codes or anything on how to do it, because you just pretty much got to get out there and do it yourself and find out. This is how much it cost me to go to Laredo. This is how much it cost me to go to Janesville, Wisconsin. That's another good one. This is how much it cost me to go to Springfield, Ohio. That's another good one. Knoxville, Tennessee. There's certain places, you know, Griffin, Georgia. And you just learn kind of where the areas are, and then how close is this to, you know, I'm dropping off in Atlanta, Georgia. How close is that to Griffin, Georgia, where I can get back out of, you know. You just learn it as you go. That's a lot of what this game is. You just gain from experience of how much it cost you to get to this trip, and if it's worth going to the next time. And with that, I'll leave it at that. Like and subscribe, leave comments, check out the merchandise below if I can get that description to work again. Sometimes I'm having problems with the damn thing copying and pasting over. Hopefully I'll be able to put that in the description below to merchandise, and see the shirts I have. Thanks to Airplane 312, I have merchandise for sale on Teespring, which is, it has like shirts, hoodies, glasses, like shot glasses, socks, and I think there's a bag or something on there. I forget all on the list, but you can see, you can click on the link below in the description if you want to buy merchandise and support the channel. Like and subscribe, leave comments, and we'll catch you on the flip. Peace.